Imagine the most powerful man in the world nearly losing everything, not to war or politics, but to a secret affair. In the mid-1992nd, President Bill Clinton seemed untouchable. The economy was booming, America was confident, and his charm captivated millions. Yet, inside the White House, a hidden relationship with an intern would soon explode into a national scandal. What began as whispers turned into headlines, investigations, and a battle for survival. In the next 15 minutes, you'll uncover how one private choice nearly toppled a presidency and changed the way America sees its leaders forever. The 1992nd were a golden moment for America. The Cold War was over, Silicon Valley was booming, and the United States stood as the world's unchallenged superpower. At the center of this success was Bill Clinton, a charismatic president whose approval ratings soared as he promised prosperity for every American household. His speeches were confident, his image carefully polished, and the White House projected stability. But history has a way of revealing cracks behind even the brightest facades. Within the bustling halls of the West Wing, a young intern named Monica Lewinsky entered the scene in 1995. She was ambitious, energetic, and eager to serve. What no one could have predicted was that her presence would intertwine with the president's in ways that went far beyond politics. Their relationship, hidden at first, carried enormous risk not just for their reputations, but for the credibility of the presidency itself. This wasn't merely a private romance. As details began to leak, the story spread like wildfire through newspapers and cable television. It transformed overnight into a public drama that questioned the very boundaries between personal desire and political responsibility. Suddenly, the Clinton presidency faced a test unlike any economic challenge or foreign crisis. This video will trace how a private relationship inside the White House spiraled into one of the most defining scandals of modern American politics. We will follow the story step by step, from its quiet beginnings to the explosive hearings that placed a sitting president on trial before the nation. By examining key moments, evidence, and consequences, you'll see how the Lewinsky affair reshaped trust in leadership, redefined the role of media, and left a permanent mark on presidential history. Through these turning points, the truth behind the scandal will finally come into clear focus. In the summer of 1995, the White House was buzzing with energy. President Bill Clinton had just completed 2 years in office, and his administration was gaining momentum. The economy was showing signs of growth. Foreign policy challenges seemed under control, and the young president carried a reputation for charm that could light up any room. At the same time, hundreds of staffers and interns filled the corridors, eager to contribute to history. Among them was Monica Lewinsky, a 22-year-old college graduate, arriving with dreams as bright as the marble walls of Washington. Lewinsky was assigned to the West Wing, where proximity to power felt intoxicating. She was enthusiastic, outspoken, and carried herself with confidence unusual for someone so young. By chance, or perhaps by fate, her path crossed with that of the president during small gatherings and routine duties. Clinton, known for his ability to make anyone feel like the most important person in the room, noticed her. Their exchanges began innocently, with jokes and smiles, but soon deepened into private conversations. The atmosphere of the White House, with its long hours and intense pressures, created opportunities for quiet moments away from watchful eyes. Eyewitness accounts later confirmed that the relationship blossomed in secrecy. It started with flirtations during meetings and encounters in the Oval Office corridors. According to Lewinsky's own testimony years later, the connection escalated into a physical relationship that stretched over months. These encounters, hidden behind closed doors, were known only to the two of them and, eventually, a handful of trusted aides who sensed that something unusual was happening. For Clinton, it was a personal indulgence in the middle of a demanding presidency. For Lewinsky, it was a heady mix of admiration, intimacy, and the thrill of being chosen by the most powerful man in the world. The secrecy seemed manageable at first. After all, presidents had long been rumored to harbor private affairs, and many never reached the public. But the 1992nd were different. Cable news was expanding, investigative journalism was aggressive, and America's appetite for political scandal was greater than ever. Even whispers could snowball into headlines. While Clinton and Lewinsky thought they were safeguarding a personal secret, the truth was slowly taking root in Washington's rumor mills. Staffers noticed unusual movements. Friends heard hints of confessions. The fragile walls of secrecy were already cracking. In hindsight, this early stage of the affair was the calm before a storm that would shake not only two lives but the entire nation. What started as a personal bond, shielded from the outside world, planted the seeds of a political earthquake. The choices made in those quiet rooms of the White House would, within a few years, ignite investigations, fuel impeachment proceedings, and permanently mark Clinton's presidency. The private relationship was destined never to remain private. But secrecy is fragile, and outside forces soon turned whispers into evidence. A lawsuit filed by another woman would drag Lewinsky's name and her hidden connection to the president into the harsh light of public scrutiny. By 1997, President Clinton was riding high in the polls. The economy surged, unemployment was low, and his image as a modern, relatable leader remained strong. But beneath the surface, legal shadows were forming that would soon connect directly to his private life. The spark came not from Monica Lewinsky, but from another woman, Paula Jones. A former Arkansas state employee, Jones had filed a civil lawsuit against Clinton, alleging sexual harassment during his time as governor. The case, initially dismissed by many as weak, would unexpectedly open the door to questions that no one in the White House could have imagined. The Paula Jones lawsuit was significant because it forced Clinton into a legal battle while serving as president. His lawyers argued that a sitting president should not be subject to civil suits, but in May 1997, the Supreme Court ruled otherwise. The decision meant Clinton would have to answer questions under oath, creating a legal process where truth and lies carried enormous consequences. To build her case, Jones's attorneys sought evidence of other relationships Clinton may have had with women. In their eyes, a pattern of behavior could help prove credibility. Suddenly, the quiet, hidden encounters with Monica Lewinsky became relevant in a courtroom far beyond the Oval Office. Lewinsky, who had by then transferred to a job at the Pentagon, confided in a colleague named Linda Tripp about her past relationship with the president. Tripp, stunned by the details, began secretly recording their conversations. These tapes captured Lewinsky admitting to an affair, providing explosive material that could link directly to the Paula Jones case. At first, Lewinsky trusted Tripp as a friend, unaware that her words were being preserved as potential evidence. Tripp, however, believed she was documenting a truth that might otherwise vanish. The exposure deepened in December 1997, when Lewinsky was subpoenaed to testify in the Jones lawsuit. Pressured by the possibility of legal jeopardy, she signed an affidavit denying any sexual relationship with the president. Clinton, when asked during his own deposition in January 1998, gave a carefully crafted denial. "I have never had sexual relations with Monica Lewinsky." It was a phrase that would echo through history. At that moment, the president chose a path that elevated the stakes from private scandal to potential perjury. Meanwhile, investigators obtained the Tripp tapes. Overnight, Lewinsky's denials collided with her recorded confessions, and Clinton's deposition was placed under suspicion. The affair, once whispered about in the shadows of Washington, now had legal documentation and audio evidence. Reporters caught wind of the story, and within days, the scandal exploded into the headlines. Newspapers splashed it across their front pages, television anchors dissected every detail, and the American public was stunned. The lawsuit that began as Paula Jones's attempt to hold Clinton accountable had grown far beyond its original scope. It had exposed the president's private life, placed Lewinsky in a spotlight she never sought, and set the stage for a legal and political firestorm. The question was no longer whether Clinton had erred in judgment, but whether he had lied under oath, and that distinction would define everything that followed. What followed next would raise the scandal to a national frenzy when denials clashed with hard evidence, and the president's words became the center of a political earthquake. By early 1998, the Clinton-Lewinsky affair had moved from whispers to a full-blown investigation. What made the scandal undeniable were the tapes, the secret recordings made by Linda Tripp. These tapes were extraordinary because they captured Lewinsky in her own voice, describing the relationship she had with the president. In Washington, rumors were common, but solid evidence was rare. The tapes changed everything. Suddenly, The private details of Oval Office encounters were preserved on cassette, ready to be dissected by lawyers, journalists, and political opponents alike. Tripp had approached independent counsel Kenneth Starr, the prosecutor already investigating Clinton's earlier controversies, including Whitewater. To Starr, the Lewinsky tapes were a gift, real-time evidence that the president might have committed perjury by denying the affair in his deposition. In January 1998, Tripp handed over her recordings, along with information about a critical piece of physical evidence, a blue dress owned by Lewinsky, allegedly stained during one of her encounters with Clinton. That dress would later become one of the most infamous artifacts in American political history, symbolizing proof that could not be spun away by clever words. As investigators dug deeper, Lewinsky found herself trapped between loyalty and survival. At first, she attempted to protect Clinton, signing affidavits, denying any sexual contact. But with the tapes and the dress in federal hands, denial was no longer an option. Prosecutors offered her immunity in exchange for testimony. The young woman who once dreamed of building a career in Washington was now a central figure in a constitutional showdown. Her name and face were plastered across every newspaper, often in cruel caricatures, while the president's defenders scrambled to paint the scandal as a private matter unworthy of public obsession. The American media sensed blood. Cable networks ran wall-to-wall coverage, dissecting every quote from Tripp, every rumor from Capitol Hill, every speculative angle about the dress. Late-night comedians feasted on the material, turning Lewinsky into a punchline. For Clinton, the damage was escalating. His carefully crafted image as a family man and leader was being dismantled in real time, not by his political opponents, but by the weight of evidence now in public view. The consequences went beyond reputation. Congress began to ask whether the president had committed not just a personal mistake, but a legal crime, lying under oath and obstructing justice. With the tape circulating in the hands of investigators, Clinton's earlier denial in his deposition now looked dangerously like perjury. The nation found itself gripped by a constitutional question. Could a president be removed from office for lying about a private affair? And more importantly, did the evidence justify such an extraordinary step? The release of the tapes and the revelation of the dress marked a turning point. What had been speculation was now hard fact, and what had been a scandal confined to gossip pages had become a matter of law. The question was no longer if the affair happened, but how much the president had lied to conceal it, and whether that lie could topple his presidency. And then came the most explosive moment of all when President Clinton stood before the nation and issued a denial that would haunt him forever. On the 26th of January, 1998, President Bill Clinton stood in the Roosevelt Room of the White House. Surrounded by his wife, Hillary, and aides who projected confidence, he delivered a line that would echo through history. "I did not have sexual relations with that woman, Miss Lewinsky." The words were crisp, direct, and emphatic. For a moment it seemed like the president was trying to draw a firm line between speculation and truth. His allies applauded his resolve, while critics bristled. Yet, the power of that statement lay not in its forcefulness, but in the shadow it cast, because the evidence piling up behind closed doors was growing impossible to ignore. Clinton's denial was not spontaneous. Advisors had urged him to remain steadfast, arguing that conceding even a shred of truth would destroy his presidency. For weeks, he stuck to the line. In public, he focused on policy achievements, speaking of balanced budgets and foreign relations. In private, however, he faced mounting pressure. Kenneth Starr's investigation was accelerating, with Tripp's tapes, Lewinsky's testimony, and the infamous blue dress forming a damning trifecta of evidence. Each day, the contradiction between his words and the facts widened, threatening not just his credibility but the trust of the American people. The denial also placed Hillary Clinton in a difficult position. In a now famous television interview, she suggested that a vast right-wing conspiracy was behind the scandal, defending her husband as a victim of political enemies. Her defense, though loyal, only deepened the polarization. Supporters saw the Clintons as targets of relentless partisan warfare, while opponents argued that the president was hiding behind smoke and mirrors. The country became divided not just about Clinton's guilt, but about the very meaning of truth in politics. By August 1998, the walls finally closed in. Lewinsky had been granted immunity, and the blue dress had tested positive for Clinton's DNA. Under pressure from investigators, the president was forced to testify before a grand jury. That summer, in an unprecedented moment, Clinton admitted to an inappropriate relationship with Lewinsky. The admission marked a seismic reversal. Months after denying everything to the nation, he now conceded the core of the allegations. His phrasing was careful, still legalistic, but the confession under oath confirmed what the evidence had already made undeniable. The confession was broadcast across the nation. Millions of Americans watched as their president struggled to balance contrition with defiance. His approval ratings dipped, but, surprisingly, did not collapse. Many Americans distinguished between his private failings and his public performance. Yet the damage to his moral authority was undeniable. Clinton, once seen as the comeback kid of politics, was now the first president in modern history to admit such a scandal under oath. This moment crystallized the stakes. It was no longer about whispers, rumors, or tapes. It was about whether a sitting president had lied to the public, to Congress, and to the courts. His denial had become a confession, and his confession would soon become the centerpiece of impeachment proceedings. With confession came consequences, and the machinery of Congress was about to turn Clinton's private sins into a constitutional showdown. The confession changed everything. Once Clinton admitted to an inappropriate relationship, the political machinery in Washington shifted into overdrive. The U.S. Constitution gives Congress the power to impeach a president for high crimes and misdemeanors, and Republicans, who controlled both the House and Senate, seized the opportunity. For them, the issue was no longer merely about sex, it was about perjury and obstruction of justice. If the president had lied under oath and encouraged others to do the same, they argued, he had violated the very foundation of the rule of law. In December 1998, the House of Representatives voted on 2 articles of impeachment: perjury before a grand jury and obstruction of justice. The debate was fiery, partisan, and televised to millions of Americans. Democrats insisted the case was about private indiscretions blown out of proportion by political enemies. Republicans countered that the issue was about honesty and accountability at the highest level of government. When the final vote was cast, Clinton became only the second president in U.S. history, after Andrew Johnson, to be impeached by the House. The impeachment set the stage for a Senate trial in early 1999. Chief Justice William Rehnquist presided as senators acted as jurors. The spectacle was unprecedented. A sitting president's personal life laid bare, arguments dissected on live television, and the legitimacy of his presidency hanging in the balance. Prosecutors played excerpts of Lewinsky's testimony, highlighted the infamous "I did not have sexual relations" denial, and argued that Clinton had tried to cover up the affair through misleading statements and pressure on aides. Clinton's defense team, however, emphasized that the charges did not meet the constitutional standard of high crimes and misdemeanors. They argued that while his actions were deeply flawed, they did not threaten the functioning of the republic. Public opinion during the trial was striking. Polls consistently showed that while most Americans disapproved of Clinton's behavior, they did not want him removed from office. His job approval ratings hovered near 70%, an almost paradoxical split between moral condemnation and political support. Many Americans believed Congress was overreaching, turning a personal failing into a constitutional crisis. The national conversation revealed a new divide: the difference between private morality and public leadership. In February 1999, the Senate delivered its verdict. On the charge of perjury, 45 senators voted guilty, 55 not guilty. On the charge of obstruction of justice, 50 voted guilty, 50 not guilty. Both counts fell short of the 2/3 majority required for removal. Clinton, though scarred, survived. He completed his second term, politically weakened but still standing, a testament to his resilience and the complexities of American democracy. The impeachment trial marked a turning point in U.S. politics. It blurred the lines between scandal and governance, reshaped the role of media in exposing private lives, and set precedents for how future presidents would be scrutinized. For Clinton, survival came at the cost of his legacy. No matter his policy successes, history would forever remember the impeachment as a defining chapter of his presidency. Clinton had survived the trial, but the aftershocks of the scandal would echo long after he left office. When the Senate acquitted Bill Clinton in February 1999, he breathed a sigh of relief, but the storm was far from over. He had survived the most perilous trial of his political life, yet his reputation bore scars that would never fully heal. For the remainder of his presidency, Clinton threw himself into policy. He focused on balancing the federal budget, expanding trade, and pushing for peace negotiations in the Middle East and Northern Ireland. On the surface, he appeared determined to prove that he was still an effective leader. Yet beneath these achievements, the shadow of the Lewinsky scandal lingered, shaping every headline and every retrospective judgment. For Monica Lewinsky, the aftermath was far harsher. At only 25, she became one of the most infamous names in America. Tabloids mocked her relentlessly. Late-night television hosts turned her into a punchline, and her personal life was dissected without mercy. Unlike Clinton, who could rely on political machinery and the power of office to recover, Lewinsky had no shield. She struggled to find work, battled shame, and later described herself as the first person to be globally humiliated on the internet. The scandal that began as a private relationship had permanently altered the course of her life. For Hillary Clinton, the legacy was complex. She stood by her husband through the ordeal, even as many urged her to walk away. Her decision was often interpreted as both an act of personal loyalty and a shrewd calculation for her own political future. In 2000, she ran for and won a U.S. Senate seat from New York, beginning a career that would eventually take her to the cusp of the presidency. The scandal, painful as it was, became part of her public narrative, a symbol of resilience, ambition, and controversy. For the nation, the impeachment left a mixed legacy. On one hand, it underscored the principle that no president is above the law. On the other, it exposed how deeply partisan politics had become. Many Americans felt the entire ordeal reflected more about congressional vendettas than constitutional duty. The episode intensified public cynicism about Washington and foreshadowed an era where personal scandals, amplified by 24-hour news and later social media, would dominate political discourse. In the years after Clinton left office in 2001, historians and commentators continued to debate his legacy. Supporters pointed to economic prosperity, welfare reform, and foreign policy efforts as signs of a successful presidency. Critics countered that the Lewinsky affair and impeachment overshadowed all else, forever tying his name to scandal. The image of a president balancing policy achievements with personal failings became an enduring paradox. Clinton himself acknowledged the mistakes, though often with a defensive tone. Lewinsky, years later, reclaimed her voice by speaking publicly about the ordeal, highlighting issues of power, consent, and digital shaming. Their intertwined names remain a cautionary tale about the fragility of reputation in the modern age. In the end, the legacy of the scandal extended beyond the individuals involved. It redefined how Americans viewed privacy, morality, and leadership. The affair began with secrecy in the Oval Office, but its echoes still shape conversations about truth and accountability in politics today. With the timeline complete, the question remains what myths surrounded this scandal and what did the records actually show? Many people believe Bill Clinton was impeached simply because of an affair. The image of a president brought down by private indiscretion is compelling, but it is not the full story. In reality, the charges that reached the floor of Congress were rooted in law, not morality. Clinton was accused of perjury and obstruction of justice, lying under oath during the Paula Jones lawsuit and attempting to conceal the truth. The scandal may have started with intimacy, but impeachment was about integrity before the courts. Another widespread belief is that the scandal destroyed Clinton's popularity. With headlines blaring and late-night shows mocking him, it seemed impossible for his presidency to recover. Yet the record tells a different story. Polls from 1,998 and 1,999 showed his approval rating holding near 70%, among the highest of his career. Many Americans condemned his behavior but distinguished it from his performance as president. They believed Congress was driven more by partisanship than principle, and so Clinton survived, buoyed by a public reluctant to see him removed. And then there is the myth of Monica Lewinsky as an opportunist who sought the spotlight. For years, she was portrayed as someone who gained from exposure. But her own words reveal the opposite. She endured ridicule, struggled to rebuild her life, and later called herself the first person to be globally humiliated on the internet. Far from benefiting, she bore the heaviest personal cost, while the president retained his power. The scandal that began with secrecy in the Oval Office eventually unfolded into a national drama that tested the limits of law, politics, and public trust. What seemed like a private relationship turned into a constitutional showdown, reminding Americans that truth carries consequences far greater than desire. In the end, the impeachment was never truly about the affair itself, but about the lies told under oath and the attempt to protect a presidency through denial. Yet perhaps the most striking lesson came from the people themselves. While they condemned Clinton's actions, they refused to demand his removal, separating his personal failings from his public role. That paradox, moral disapproval, combined with political survival, left a legacy that continues to shape how scandals are understood in American politics today. If there is one lesson to take from this story, it is that power alone cannot shield anyone from the weight of truth. Bill Clinton entered the scandal as a president at the height of success, yet a single lie nearly unraveled his career and forever altered his legacy. The Clinton-Lewinsky affair forced America to confront difficult questions about honesty, responsibility, and the blurry line between private flaws and public duty. It left scars on everyone involved, from the president himself to Monica Lewinsky, whose life was changed in ways she never chose. And it left behind a political culture more obsessed with scandal than ever before. As you reflect on this chapter of history, ask yourself, should a president's private sins determine their public fate? If this story gripped you, the next one will take you even deeper